G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and so far you're having a fantastic midweek as well. Now of course legends, we have a lot to go over today, but of course today is a massive day for me as well. Yesterday I had my MRI scan on my brain tumour. Of course this is the update scan and results that I'll receive this afternoon after conducting 3 months of chemotherapy. So look, fingers crossed that it has improved the tumour, or that it's the same, or let's really hope that it isn't worse. So again, we will see. I'll either make a follow-up video with those results, or I'll put them in the Telegram or on my Instagram. So thank you for all the good wishes, and let's hope things continue on at least a more positive path, will start on a more positive path than they have been. But of course, what have we got to go over today as far as the video? Well, we're going to look at the maps. We're going to compare 3 different maps. As well, we're going to look at a number of geolocations that may be saying differently to the map. So we'll look over that from the north to the south and the east, and what this tells us about where future actions or current actions are taking place. We need to talk about frozen assets. Of course, Europe holds but around $300 billion in frozen Russian assets. Some players in Europe want to use that to transfer to Ukraine. Other players are saying, no, this is risky. It can undermine our own currency. So we'll go over that and the risks. I want to just debunk, and I can't believe I'm doing this because it seems so obvious, but debunk the idea around nuclear weapons and Ukraine's nuclear weapons. And we hear it from so many, and this comes in peaks and troughs, that it lines up, directly correlates to when things are going poorly. What you hear about is we'll give the nuclear weapons back. And I want to push back on this and go, well, look, let's look at factual evidence of this and what those nuclear weapons were. Would they even be in date? Who had control over them? And all of that, and what was actually done in that swap, because it was voluntarily given up. So we'll talk about that and debt and risk. And of course then the main part of the video is going to be about Ukraine's minerals and the deal that has been signed between Kyiv and Washington, and how this looks, where it started, where it's different, and of course the tactics in business of start high and work your way down. And this is exactly what we have seen Trump do, and exactly what we thought that he would do as well. And in this we need to update parliamentary support of Zelensky, because yesterday he didn't have the support of the parliament, and then as of today does have parliamentary support, with a changing vote and people coming back into the office. So we'll talk about that, and how if that continued as it did yesterday, how that would have affected these minerals. So let's start on the maps. And of course, you have Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014, and the red check that you're going to see, that is ground that is being occupied by Russia over the past 24 hours, except for up in between Sumy and Kursk oblast, of course, Ukraine and Russia, where we see this blue. And what this blue is indicating is where Ukraine, that they have launched their offensive now over 6 months ago back into Russia. Now, let's talk about this, as a number of maps are showing updates, and we have a geolocation in here as well. So for the sake of this, let's not look really at the north where it shows a Russian advancement. Let's focus on then the western side. So of course we have Sverdlikovo, which is sitting down in this area, as well as what we can see by this map in the zoom in, that above Sverdlikovo, where you can line up then this small next town, that there has been like a hook coming around. And we're seeing a lot of maps showing this. And what these maps are showing is something that is looking a little bit like this. Now, what this is looking like though, is it's looking like a hook maneuver around onto Sudzha. So we will see. And of course, these maps showing that Russia has pushed back to the border, and as well, some indicating that Russia actually maintain a peace in Sumy at the moment. So definitely keep an eye on this. And I'm not surprised at all to see these pushes. So up in the north, I said to ignore it for the time, but we see Pokrovsk. Now, this map is behind in this location, because we see at the geolocation sitting just here, so above this road, right between the G and the R on this map, we see that a Russian flag has gone up. These guys are standing on top of a building here with some fucking Lada bangers going, that they are waving the flag of the Russian Federation, as well as a unit flag as well. So given that these guys are on top of the building here, I would say that we can fairly comfortably say that Pokrovsk has come back under Russian control. Now, what I think we may see in Kursk is territorial-wise, Kursk is the card on the table for Ukraine. It's the only card territorially that is on the table. Now, what I say is do not overestimate this. It's 416 square kilometres. By deep state, probably less when we take into account with the updates that we have just seen. So let's say 410, for instance, that Russia occupy well over 100,000. Although this is very sensitive because it is ground back into Russia. So yes, this is a card on the table. It's not this trump card swap back all the territories, which I think some people, even to the very top, believe that it is. And that concerns me because I'm like, you honestly think this is going to get swapped for the Donbass? While the Russian forces not just then sit in defense and push an actual 60,000 amount of forces in here to push it back. But I do believe if we're heading into negotiations, very likely that we will see Russia mobilise more forces off other areas of the front line or reserves to try and diminish this as much as possible, to put themselves in the strongest possible position if it comes down to relations between America, Russia, and Ukraine. Of course, America acting as an intermediary. So keep an eye on this. I won't be surprised if we see more updates. Then I want to move across just into the east, but the northeastern corner, an area which I think is being ignored, but do not. I believe this is, one, tells us about the tactical situation of reserves due to the actual capacity to cross this and expand, but also it could be where Russia is opening a new area. And we can see that today, Topoli has come under Russian occupation. Of course, across the Oskil against then the Russia-Ukraine border. So definitely keep an eye on this. And DivGen map, they are showing this occupation as well. So don't underestimate this just because other maps aren't showing it or because it's small. Remember, 1 kilometre square somewhere may be equal to 10 or 15 or 20 on another area of the front line. Then we come down Kupyansk front, and of course the pocket that has formed around Pishani. We do have a Syriac map update in this here somewhere as well. Sorry, I've called it northeast. So we see further pushes coming down just to the west of then Sinkivkia, the main Kupyansk sector, but also filling in of areas out to the west of Orleinkia as well, just above where this dogleg in the road is. So this sector in here, and of course not being shown across the maps, but wait and see for further confirmations, or if we do get an end to the war and ceasefire and then the border holds somewhere, well, I think a lot of maps are going to be stuck with their finger up their ass going, well, why wasn't that shown this many kilometres forward? So we will wait and see before we actually are comfortable to confirm anything. Now, where I want to head next is down into Velyka Novosilka. Now, we actually have a few updates. Of course, today's updates are the 26th, but Deep State Map, they've been releasing maps at different times throughout the day, so it doesn't always line up with my video. So we got one yesterday evening after I already filmed and posted, and we got one then this morning. So we're going to show a few of these. So we see Skudny in here, and then I'll bring up the map from yesterday. So what Russia did yesterday was to the north of Velyka Novosilka, has then gone on the west and eastern outskirts of Skudny, and today has filled in then the centre right up to at least the first blocks. And Syriac maps, he's confirming this. Russian army captured a series of positions northwest here, reaching the outskirts of Skudny. So we can confirm this definitely happened. And from having a bit of a more zoom in look, I actually believe that Syriac isn't showing as far as Deep State is. But we can see some of the concerns from this is, of course, heading out to the main area they'll be looking for is then the capture of Komar. And what we see again and again is when an area falls, we see then very quickly ground made after that. And you're wondering why I've zoomed out on the map. Well, this is Vuhledar back here, which I know was months ago, but it seems like just the other day that somewhere, let's go to the closest point, of 23 kilometres past. And Velyka Novosilka, which still hasn't actually been confirmed lost, I believe, at least a lot of pages still haven't talked about it, is some say 6 kilometres past. So this is what we see, major fight, and then it sort of escalate into a further push forward. And we may see that through then defensive works up until Komar, which would be of a major concern for then the remainder of Donetsk Oblast down in the southwest. And of course, trying to keep the Russians out of Dnipro Oblast, which is where we'll talk about next, in and around then Pokrovsk and Uspanivka. So let's start on the Uspanivka area first. Now, this map, no change, but if we see between the 24th and the 25th, we do see a slight reduction in red in here, indicating that there was a loss of areas, although not blue check. So we don't know exactly what has occurred in there. Suryak, he does speak about this as well. So on this one here, we're talking about Uspanivka in here. Last 3 days, Ukrainian army recaptured most of the locality of Uspanivka. So he's saying that Ukraine had an offensive action in here and has taken back most of it. Now, down to the south of here, we're talking about, this is Zaporizhzhia, and then a northern push, or more to the north of Zaporizhzhia, out to the west here. On the other hand, Russian army took full control of the locality of Zaporizhzhia, which sits down in here, confirmed by then the deep state map yesterday, and then to the north of here, showing then the red check that we see today. This was yesterday's deep state, showing the occupation of Zap. And of course, I believe that Pokrovsk, why has this slowed down? I'm not surprised at all to have actually seen this slow down. Now, Russia is pushing in other areas. Why? Well, it may be the path of least resistance, because Pokrovsk, very important. Informationally, Russia entering Dnipro Oblast is catastrophic. So, what I believe is Ukraine has moved forces around and called up any reserves in to try and stabilise this front. And what we have seen is then this front really slowed down, as well as Russia are fairly extended on this area. So what Russia will do, being numerically superior force, what they will do is just push on other sectors, which we are seeing then movement in Velyka Novosilka and all the way in the northeastern corner, or even in Kursk. And this is what is awarded to you, being numerically superior, is that then you can just push in many areas and then thin out the forces. And this is Brusilov World War I Russian tactics. And I'm not surprised to see this. So Russia may have no want to actually continue through areas in the northeast, although I think it's tactically very important and potentially strategically very important. But what it may do is draw forces away from here, and then we may see this start moving again. So remember, it's push and pull. There's a finite amount of resources and men. But as far as who is more finite at this point in time, it is Ukraine. So Russia have it in their interest to lengthen the front line when they can. Again, off that basic breakdown of that, this is why Kursk, to me, has never, ever made sense. And to many others who aren't just caught in a narrative, drinking Kool-Aid and bloody, I don't know, I didn't have another insult. But let's have a look at Toretsk. Now, this is where we see an interesting geolocation. Now, Ministry of Defense of Russia and other maps are showing that Toretsk has come either completely under control or just the outskirts are within Ukrainian control. But we can see from this video here, which I can't show you on YouTube, but we do see Ukrainian forces under heavy shelling by Russian artillery right in and about where my cursor is at the moment. So definitely remaining grey zone in that area. Okay, can't delete. I don't know. Anyway, let's go up into Belahorivkia front. Of course, this is the Seversk pocket, and this has been one of the most defended areas, and as far as ground being made, very, very limited over a long period of time. But we have Belahorivkia. Now, this map is behind on geolocations that are now a few days old. We had a geolocation on this tree line right in here of a Russian flag going up to the western side of course, this chalk quarry. So let's have a look at then Suryak map. Situation Seversk front. In the last 48 hours, Russian army secured new areas inside and around Belahorivkia. We might say that the urban area of the locality is now under full control of Russian forces. However, the chalk quarry is still under grey zone, as Ukrainian army is still trying to maintain this hill, which is mandatory to end one of the most fierce battles of the war. Of course, Belahorivkia and movement into Seversk. But instead of trying to go up and over it, it's looking like Russia is doing the tradition of what the Russian force have been doing and just enveloping this chalk quarry, of course, is here. And where we see those geolocations is around about where I'm showing you at this point in time, or up in here. Remember, I showed you that map with 3 geolocations on it, confirming movements in 3 different sectors out around Belahorivkia as well. So let's talk about frozen assets, as I think this is something that is very, very oversimplified and looking locally, not internationally. And we need to look internationally because, of course, we're in a competitive global market. The bargaining chip. This was by Politico. Amid the looming threat of US disengagement from Ukraine, Russia hawks argue that unfreezing the cash and handing it to Kyiv would allow the war-torn country to gain the upper hand on the battlefield. Now, what I'll say is I believe Europe as a whole, Europe has not accepted that the problem is not weapons. The problem is manpower and command competency. And they'll come to this realisation at some point. But what I hope doesn't happen is there are another 100,000 men in the ground before they actually come to that realisation. And how they're going to fix that? Well, I do not know. But what we do know is that around $300 billion worth of Russian assets are frozen in Europe. We heard, of course, President Macron talk about this yesterday, and many are saying, well, this should just be then liquidated and sent into Ukraine or paid for more weapon systems. But again, that is the domestic oversimplified look, but if you look internationally, this can have large flow-on effects. Of course, there's a lot of big guns opposing this. France, Germany, Italy, Spain. These are the 4 largest economies in the EU. These account for 61% or approximately 61% of the EU's total GDP. So when the Estonian foreign minister is talking about doing this, or then the EU's top diplomat, Estonia, Kaja Kallas, is talking about doing this, we need to look at the end of the day, Germany is a quarter of the EU's GDP, Estonia is 0.24%, and that does matter when we're looking at then the EU maintaining then the euro and the power of that and localised hegemony as well. So we also see that Ursula von der Leyen is against this as well. These people, or these countries, they fear that confiscating the funds, the EU would spook international investors and relinquish its greatest advantage in the peace talks. So one of its greatest advantages is we have $300 billion, but also, can you really undermine your own currency? The euro, the dollar, the pound, any currency, they are likely going to be threatened over the next year or next decade, especially if BRICS look to make their own currency, as well as BRICS or the ruble or the dollar or the pound or whatever will be threatened or potentially will be threatened by cryptocurrencies, a globalized currency moving into the future as well. So it's very important to maintain the power while you can, and this is a big risk. The most simple way of doing this is just think if you're a Chinese or an Indian or whatever, you're a billionaire or you've invested here or you're Saudi and your country does something that the other country doesn't like and they can freeze your assets, how comfortable would you be putting your money there? Right now, if someone gave you $50,000, would you change that into USD, euro, pounds, rubles, yen, what currency? Now, most people, I would think, would say they'd put it into the USD. And I would be on that side as well. That's why America is such a global power, is seen as the international stability and safety of the USD. But that can also be threatened as well. And I believe the euro and the pound is really sinking in that trust. And this could absolutely obliterate it too. So there needs to be some urge of caution on that, I believe, as well. And I've heard some bankers through articles talk about how they really see that as a bad move. Again, we will see. Now, this is something that I can't believe we have to continue speaking about because it's so ridiculous. But I guess it is a good barometer to show us who is uninformed, misguided, or is just pushing a narrative that doesn't actually fit in with reality or facts that were accepted up until very recently. And they won't accept that Ukraine was a vastly different country in the 90s to maybe what it is now. So let's go over this. And of course, what we're talking about is nuclear weapons and all the talk online about give Ukraine back its nukes. And the funny thing is, there's a direct correlation between this talk and when things aren't going well. So when something goes poorly, people go, well, this is because you took the nuclear weapons, or give us back our nuclear weapons. There's a direct correlation, the peaks of troughs of this. But of course, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has told in a Breitbart exclusive that it's not a serious offer when Zelensky is asking for nuclear weapons. He's saying, I don't think anyone would think it's a serious offer on their part, nor do I think equipping them with nuclear weapons is a solution to the problem. Now, at the end of the day, if Ukraine looked to become a nuclear state through nuclear non-proliferation treaties from then America, or from all the nuclear states, it just wouldn't happen at the end of the day, and you'd know about it beforehand. Now, he has said, I haven't heard Zelensky say that, so if he's out there saying that, I don't think that's a realistic demand, and I don't think that nuclear weapons are their answer. But of course, Zelensky has floated this deal on multiple then public podcasts or interviews or press conferences with, of course, Mr. Piers Morgan saying, well, give us back our nuclear arms. So let's talk about this idea of give back the nuclear arms that you then took away, that you snatched out of our hands like someone off the street to go to the front line. Because it seems like something that was very trending on Twitter and, could be or would have been the silver bullet. Now, let's be the facts about this. Of course, when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, Ukraine inherited nuclear weapons. They did not own them. Ukraine did not have operational control over these systems. They did not have the maintenance or infrastructure or the security or the stability economically to keep these weapons maintained, all of that as well. They did not have that, as well as even for the Soviet PU weapons, they have a shelf life of 22 years. The most recent stationed Soviet nuclear weapons in Ukrainian soil was in 1988, so it would have expired a long time ago anyway. But of course, the maintenance and infrastructure and the operational control was not there. The Budapest Memorandum, it was not forced disarmament on Ukraine. Ukraine voluntarily agreed to transfer the warheads to Russia in exchange for security assurances from the US, the UK, and Russia. Now, you can pick a time when these have been broken by these countries. Of course, you've had an invasion and then you haven't had some of the guarantees upheld as well. Warheads, these were a liability, not an asset. It's very, very expensive to maintain, and the security, all of that around these as well as other countries not trusting with that system of we need to do something about that. The delivery systems as well were Soviet owned. This goes into the operational control of these. It was all from Russia. The weapons was there, but everything else was back on the other side of the border at this point in time. The United States and Russia, they helped with denuclearization for Ukraine, and Ukraine received economic and security commitments in return for transferring the weapons that was then given back to Russia. Russia forgave between 1.8 billion and 2.5 billion in debt. Ukraine at the time was in a financial crisis, and there was concern about these weapons falling into the wrong hands or an incident. There was concern about this. And of course, not only was there that 1.8 billion, but also fuel for nuclear reactors given as well. A lot of Soviet weapons got sold at the collapse of the Soviet Union, whether from Ukraine or Belarus or Russia. But in this case, we're talking about Ukraine. We have, I guess, maybe the most famous of the Virage aircraft carrier in 1998 was sold to China for 20 million and became China's first aircraft carrier. The Tu-160 and Tu-95 strategic bombers, which I'm sure you are familiar with, in 1999 to 2000, 11 of these were sold to Russia for debt relief, and some were scrapped under US pressure. So all I'm getting at is, if we're going to talk about something, let's talk about facts. And the fact of the matter is, those nuclear weapons, even if they remained, which didn't have operational control or the infrastructure around it, would have been out of date anyway, and that it was a vastly, vastly different picture at the moment. Vastly different picture then than at the moment. So let's be real about it. You can say this all you want. I just don't get a lot of these empty statements. And I'm like, what does that actually achieve, though? When people say, well, give us back our nukes, you know that's not going to happen, so why are you so focused on it? And what I see a lot of, and I think is like the ultimate of this, that I see most is, well, Russia should just withdraw. And I'm like, well, okay, this goes into what I spoke about yesterday. That may be the right thing. But is that going to happen? No, it's not going to happen. Russia is not just about to go, oh shit, James Smith posted on Instagram comments that Russia should just withdraw. Oh shit, fuck, okay, boys turn around, let's go home. It's just not going to happen. So I don't really get that point. If you want to help, go and sign up. There's a manpower crisis. You want to help, donate funds. Posting Russia should just withdraw goes into what we spoke about yesterday, that there's this idea that being right is might. that just because you are right, or you believe that you are right or more moral or ethical, or your principles are in the correct position, that therefore you will be victorious. And what I say is, I don't think it matters who is right in a war of attrition. It matters who is left. And at this point, Russia and the majority of soldiers and groups I see, they couldn't give a shit if the West thinks that they are wrong, that they are evil, they are whatever. So that idea of like shaming on it isn't having much effect. Okay, let's talk about minerals. And of course, the deal between then the US and Ukraine. But this is going to link in with slide number 3 or 4, and links in with the slide we shared yesterday, that Ukrainian Parliament adopts a resolution supporting Zelensky after all, after the failed attempt yesterday. So they didn't get the votes yesterday to actually support Zelensky from the Parliament. A majority of 268 members of Parliament voted in favour of the draft. The draft, of course, was the Verkhovka Rada of Parliament, once again recalls that the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, was elected in free, transparent, democratic elections. His mandate is not called into question by the Ukrainian people or the Verkhovka Rada. Now, the reason this was held, to reaffirm this, was mainly just symbolic, to show, look at the support, look at this, look at that. But it failed, and that backfired. But today, miraculously, now it has passed. There was a total of 226 votes in favour compared to then the 218 from yesterday. So now it has then passed. Now, we see this, that yesterday we shared Zelensky got 218, and that there was 54 members of Parliament then who were not present in the meeting room who unexpectedly didn't take part in the vote. These included 38 representatives from Zelensky's Servant of the People's Party. They did not disclose the reasons why they were not there. So all but 4 then came in today, weren't there yesterday, and voted for Zelensky. Now, if this didn't happen, the mineral deal that we're going to see would have been a nightmare. So would have other bits and pieces. And of course, did not help the informational war about from Trump to Putin saying this is illegitimate if the backing of the own parliament. But we have seen that swing around within a 24-hour period. Ukraine agrees minerals deal with the US. This is by the Financial Times. That Kiev has agreed terms with Washington on a minerals deal that Ukrainian officials hope will improve relations with the Trump administration and pave the way for a long-term US security commitment. Officials say Kyiv is now ready to sign the agreement on jointly developing mineral resources, including oil and gas, after the US has dropped the demand for the $500 billion. And of course, what we say is if you're negotiating, you start high and you work your way down. People do not understand, I think people underestimate, how much influence the US actually has. Because over the past years, administrations, they have not thrown their weight against allies. But I think people do not understand how much power the US actually has. Let's just take this for example. Starlink. If that got cut off, that is catastrophe on the front line instantly. Instantly. GPS, systems, salaries, all that, straight away. They can leverage on that. You can call it extortion, call it whatever you want. But the leverage the US has is huge. Do not underestimate this. And how does America have so much leverage here? Well, this is what happens when you are not sovereign through self-sufficiency. Either you are completely self-sufficient and that is your sovereignty, or that you have a healthy balance of the pillars of sovereignty through energy, international trade, and military. So if you have a good, healthy balance of from different areas, you are sovereign because no one player can push on you so much. The problem in Europe is, overall now, a lot of this has now weighted towards America. As Russian gas has been cut off, it has been switched to, in a lot of areas, to American liquid natural gas. Military is American. A lot of economic trade is American. So those 3 pillars are now overwhelmingly American. So this has increased the control that America does have and the leverage America can now push, because everything from military to energy can then be moved to make the way that America see the world. This goes back to the idea of, is it really more sovereign now that Russian gas isn't there, or Russian energy? Forget morals or ethics or war, but as for you just talking sovereignty as objectively as possible, now it's all in the hands of the Yanks. Although The text lacks explicit security guarantees. The officials argue that they had negotiated a far more favourable terms and depicted the deal as a way of broadening the relationship with the US to shore up Ukraine's prospects after 3 years of war. What we know is the relationship between Zelensky and Trump is in the toilet, of course, with Trump calling him a dictator, and that this helps move that forward. The minerals agreement is only part of the picture. We've heard multiple times in the US administration that it's part of a bigger picture. So it's from the Deputy Prime Minister. It'll be interesting to see what this bigger picture actually is. And I believe that it's, not some 4D chess game. I believe the US administration, they want their money back. They want funds to help then rebuild on some promises that have been given. And they want then the war to end as per election promises. The original draft's highly onerous terms, which President Donald Trump presented as a means of Ukraine repaying the US for military and financial aid, remember, up to $350 billion that he requested, $500 billion. Start high, work your way down. Like trying to buy a fake bloody Omega in Southeast Asia. After President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected the initial text last week, Trump called him a dictator. The final version of the agreement, dated the February 24th, so on the 3-year anniversary, and seen by Financial Times, would establish a fund into which Ukraine would contribute 50% of proceeds from the future monetization of state-owned mineral resources, including oil and gas and associated logistics. The fund would invest in projects in Ukraine, so 50% going. And I'm guessing a lot of this investment project in Ukraine is then going to go to US contractors. The people that got rich from Afghan war were not the Afghanis, sure as shit not the soldiers. It was the contractors to go build bridges, to schools, to bases, to clean toilets, whatever, or make food. The contractors made billions upon billions upon billions. And this is setting, I think, the stage for, okay, the roads have all been blown up. Right, this US company is going to come in and do X, Y, and Z, as well as, the US trying to recoup some of that funds. It excludes mineral resources that already contribute to Ukrainian government coffers, meaning it would not cover the existing activities of Naftogaz or Ukrainafka, Ukraine's largest gas and oil producers. Of course, we haven't seen this yet, and this is just the bare bones of it so far. However, the agreement omits any reference to US security guarantees, which Kyiv originally listed on return for agreeing to the deal. It also leaves crucial questions as to the size of the US stake in the fund and the terms of joint ownership deals to be hashed out. So it's going to get hashed out in the future, but we don't know how big the US's part in this really is. There's no security guarantees, and that was one of the things to get forward. But again, like I say, America can the leverage, especially into Ukraine at the moment, from ISR to Starlink to salaries to military hardware to everything. The leverage, what is Zelensky going to do? If he says we're going to turn off Starlink or whatever, your hands are tied. You either have to surrender at that point because Starlink would have that effect, or you're going to have to sign it. So it may not be fair. World politics is not fair. After 3 years in which the US was Kyiv's primary military aid donor, Trump has overturned Washington's policy by opening bilateral talks with Russia without any European allies or Ukraine at the table. Yes, that's what bilateral means. Bi equals two, which doesn't make sense. When wouldn't LGBT mean that there's two then? Anyway, but the thing is, what I'll say is in this, I believe that the European allies in Ukraine, they are not open to a ceasefire talk negotiation right now. In Ukraine, it is illegal to do that. Law hasn't been lifted, so yeah, that's objectively true. And then the European allies, as far as the major powers, they want the war to continue as they want Ukraine to be in a position of power. My concern is what then occurs when they come to the realization that no, Ukraine's problem is not weapons or frozen assets, it is manpower and command competence. How do they then fix this? Zelensky will be travelling to the White House in the coming weeks. I've heard on the 28th, which is 2 days away. Another official said this will be a chance for the president to discuss what the bigger picture is, and then after it, we'll be able to think of what the next steps are. The Trump administration, this is the original proposal, was 50% of the fund's revenues from mineral extraction, including the oil and gas, up to a maximum then of $500 billion. Those terms were described as unacceptable by Ukrainian officials and have been removed from the final draft. We have not seen this yet. The mandate for the fund to invest in Ukraine is a further change Kyiv had sought. The document states the US will back Ukraine's economic development into the future, so reinvesting back in. But the US is not going to be not getting a piece of their pie in this. Ukrainian officials added the deal was just a framework agreement and that no revenues would change hands until the fund was in place. So still waiting out on that. Zelensky's government will also have to seek approval from Ukraine's parliament, where opposition MPs have signalled they will at the very least have a heated debate before ratifying such a deal. And as of today, suddenly Zelensky has the majority in the Ukrainian parliament in the Rada. But we will see what actually goes through the parliament there as well. It has to go through there. So let's look at what Trump has said about these minerals.
What does Ukraine get in return, Mr.
$350 billion and lots of equipment and military equipment and the right to fight on and originally the right to fight. Look.
So what does Ukraine get out of this? And what he's saying is, well, you got $350 billion. Of course, that figure that Trump uses again and again. I've given the way that I believe Trump has got to that figure over the stated $150, $180 billion that many will come to. I've given my piece on how that is. But that he's saying, well, without that, you would not have had the ability to fight. He uses the word right to fight. I guess maybe not the best choice of words, but if the US support wasn't there, Europe did not have the ability and still does not have the ability to step up to the table as per the US did at the time with ISR and military and industrial and economic, and the sanctions, all of that as well. Then I guess if you want to put the right to fight or the ability to actually have defense, America did grant that through that, and it was an exorbitant amount of money, and US is looking for some of that back. So how this will actually look, well, we do not know. Legends, wish me luck. I need to go to this appointment now. Have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.